Most video game music sound amazing, but a lot of it also sound kind of the same. One of the hardest things for any artist, I think any artist could say, not only musicians, but for any art, one of the hardest things for us is to find our voice. And throughout the years of me composing music and producing music on my own and playing around with the software, with plugins, with instruments and such, I've kind of found that certain things that I do are part of that voice or unique voice that I have, or hopefully I have. I initially was going to say that these are tips, but these are not necessarily tips. I'm not telling you do this. I pivoted the idea of this video to be more of those things that I do that I think keep my music sound and compositions uniquely mine. So let's get to it. And the very first thing that I unconsciously do actually is I don't confuse production with composition. When I was in music composition class, one of the things that shocked me a lot was how much emphasis and focus all of the other students had in plugins, effects, and mixing. And to be honest, I'm not judging. Like out there's a lot of emphasis on production, right? Especially with so much focus on DAWs being about, electronic music. A lot of people start confusing production and composition. So my thing is I always focus on writing music. I really start adding plugins and effects and that sort of stuff way later in the process. Yes, I would add maybe, if I record a guitar, like in my most recent episode on my soundtrack that I'm composing for Hollow Knight. By the way, watch that video. I recorded the guitar and then I added a little bit of reverb and such, but I didn't necessarily like spend a lot of time. I just gave it that texture quickly and keep moving forward on composition. And my second point, I think, is very related to the first, and is that I don't overuse sound design. And again, I'm not I'm not like judging people who use a lot of sound design. Actually, nowadays it's very prominent. Like for example, I tend to use listen to a lot of like cyberpunkish, not the game, but cyberpunkish synth wave kind of music. Most of it is just sound design. I can see, like, I can hear a phrase that's very simple, and then the whole song is just sound design, effects and samples one on top of the other, and a lot of very intricate sound design happening throughout the entire song. I think that's something that I don't rely on heavily. Of course, I use it whenever I think it's needed. Try not to overuse it. I mean, the song is not about all those effects. If every cue is a whoosh and a drone and an effect, I mean, I don't feel like I'm composing music. I feel like I'm just like kind of painting effects on top of each other. My third point is I do not use library samples. I remember a long time ago that a friend of mine that was listening to stuff that I did back then asked me what samples are you using, and I didn't understand. My response was more like samples of instruments that I was using. My response was that it was a mix because I sometimes I use sampled instruments and sometimes I use like just like modules, right? And reason. And he was like, no, 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 no. What samples, like in terms like rhythms, like drums, and that sort of stuff, and maybe even phrases, and that was what he was referring to. And I don't. And again, I mean, I know there are services out there that you pay a membership and you get a bunch of samples and you get a bunch of, loops and that sort of stuff. And that's all fine. I just don't use it. And to be honest, I don't recommend that if you're writing music for video games. It's very important, especially in video games, that you make the music of that video game representative of that video game. So it has to feel very unique. And when you're using libraries that millions or I don't know how many people, I don't know if millions, but lots of people are using out there, there's always going to be some sort of sameness with the music, right? With the music that you hear. Especially I would guess that in those libraries there are probably some favorites, right? Synths or drum beats or that sort of stuff. So if that is something that lots of people are using, your music is not going to stand out as unique. Fourth thing that I do is I record things from real life, especially on the theme of your game, right? You got to figure out what type of game you're composing for, or what type. If you're composing, let's say for a trailer or for a movie or for a show, for a video game, it would be great if you can record something that actually relates to that content. And let me show you an example with music that we've already seen in the channel here. Like for example, this sound that I used for my atmospheric track. Right? That I recorded. And was actually this string, this spring, I mean. Another sound that I recorded here was this. Now, this is a part of this track where I did sound design, right? And not only I recorded my own sample, but I did actually some sound design. So in the video that I deconstruct this track, I think I go over a little bit more of what I did there to accomplish or to get that sound. And then there's another sound that I also recorded. I think is this track here. Again, very metallic, very. I just grabbed like a aluminum bowl with an aluminum cup, and I just did like this. The fifth thing that I do is I try to always keep surprises throughout the track. Always try to add unexpected elements, including things that we've already touched, like my very own, special effects or recordings and that sort of stuff. Odd chords or pauses or time shifts, stuff like that, or add a new instrument or play around with the mix when you get to that production step, which again I want to emphasize, compose your song first, then get into those production elements. But throughout your process, always try to inject in the song, in the track, surprises, because that's kind of the reward that the player or listener gets for paying attention. And I'm going to show you examples of what I mean. Again, this is a track that we've already sing in the channel. This is the Futuristic Spy. Not only I try, to grab your attention right away in the song. You get that, right? And it's basically a reverse. Throughout the song, especially after you compose your phrase, your main phrase, usually for me, it's like 16 bars. I would write 16 bars as my main melody or phrase, and then I play with that, right? And how I play with that is adding some pauses and maybe playing with tempo, that sort of stuff. So for example, in this track, how I did it was, this was my main phrasing, right? I add that pause there. And one of the things that I do is kind of always, I tend to respond to my phrases. And right after that last note, I add that response. So it's those little nuggets and surprises to keep the listener engaged, right? A little surprise is not necessarily something that you add. It can be something that you take out. With this synth here, I only do the first two notes, right? I don't do it all of the notes. Again, little detail, part people won't even tell, but it's a little detail there that's unexpected. And it's also part of the buildup of the song. But yeah, right? So a little build up there because we're transitioning into the climax of the song. But one of the things that I also refer to when I talk about unexpected things, surprises. And the following part, I have the same notes, same melody, ding, ding, but now I speed up, right? And it feels different. It feels moving forward. And not only that, but again, it's a little surprise that rewards the listening who's paying attention to the music. Hopefully they're paying attention. Hopefully they like your music. And here I have a few surprises. Not only I the phrasing, it's faster. So I had bing boom pause, bing boom bing boom. Now it's bing boom bing boom 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 bing boom. But it's are literally the same notes and the same phrase. It's just sped up quicker. And we are in the climax of the song. But also I added a few effects. So let's just play it. Bam bam. And if you notice, I don't add the band down. I didn't do it throughout. Again, sometimes surprising the listener is just taking things out. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to overdo it. I apologize. Didn't want to overdo it. So I just kept it in two of the notes. The sixth thing that I do is focus on the game and not my ego. That's something that I try always to get away from is serving myself. Of course, the music is going to have hopefully my signature, my style, all of these elements coming together. But don't let your ego, I don't let my ego get in the way, right? It's the music should be serving the game. The music shouldn't be serving me. But this is kind of a delicate balance because of course you got to like the music, right? At the same time, that work that you do should serve the game, the product, the movie, the show that you're composing or that you're creating something for. I always try to keep in mind that that balance should remain right throughout everything. The music has a purpose not only to work with the game but also play with the player, right? And the music ultimately should make the player feel more engaged, more immersed in the game or the content. The seventh thing, and probably one of the hardest, is I try to keep it simple. For every creative out there, I think, not only musicians, but for every creative out there, I think simplicity is one of the hardest thing because not only it's kind of perceived sometimes that simplicity it equals not good. Um, and simple things could be not good, right? But making something good and simple is a very very hard thing to do. But when you strike that balance of simplicity and with something good, your art becomes memorable. And just go back to your favorite soundtracks. I mean, if you think of Mario, if you think of Zelda, if you think of, I don't know, Doom, if you think more recently, if you think of Expedition 33, those tracks, that music is, you don't forget about it. And it's very, very simple. Simple doesn't mean boring. And that's hard for lots of artists and lots of people actually to understand. The eighth thing that I do is I always try to keep it weird. And this connects to a previous point. Always bring your personality into the music. That's so important. And also, it's super hard because one of the things that I've noticed a lot, that happens a lot, is that keeping it weird, some people might think it's about making it complicated, making it unbearable, to be honest. And it also applies to some of the points before, like when you do sound design, for example, do your own stuff, record your own stuff. Don't do library samples. Instead, try to do your own effects. Try to do your own sounds. That's one of the reasons why that I use Reason, the Reason Studios, is because it allows me to play with the modules in a way that I can create my own presets, right? And I have many, and that will keep it weird because hopefully you end up with sounds that nobody have used before. Lots of artists fall into this category of coming up with something new and being afraid of something, of using something new, just to remain in the comfort zone of stuff that, if I'm gonna do a cyberpunkish track, then it gotta sound like everything that's out there. I come from liking metal and rock in general, right? And part of that style of music, that genre of music, is the skill. It's all part of the music itself. Like it's part of that culture, and that genre of music is the skill of those players. It's very important. One of the things that I bring from liking that type of music, and actually composing back in the day when I was a kid, that type of music, is, especially with progressive bands, there's a lot of tempo shifts and odd timings and odd beats and that sort of stuff. So one of the things where I try to keep it weird is kind of overlapping different tempos in the music. Like if I might have the track be a 4/4 4/4 track, but then I have a guitar that's playing in 3/4. Those things, that's kind of the weird things that I do to keep it weird, to keep it like the player or whoever's listening, like, wait, what? If I can make the listener react like that, like, wait, what's happening here? I think I've done my job. But you don't have to do it that way. That's just one way in which I do it. I also do it, playing around with Reason, making my own sounds, and that sort of stuff. The ninth thing is I try not to rely a lot on effects, mix, and mastering. You can have a great mix on not a great composition. That's not gonna save the song. This is something that happens a lot nowadays, again, because of the EDM influence, and pop music does it a lot. It's like compressors. Like they will I think, in my opinion, it's overused. They will even layer different type of compressors one on top of another to accomplish their own sound, and that's great. But that's something that I don't do. I do compressor if I want to, bump a little bit, maybe the a drum if I want to make it punchier. That's something that I would do. I would use a compressor, but I will tend to not try to rely on those effects, and I would try to manage my sound with the volumes, and then at the end just little tweaks whenever needed. And also loudness. I don't try to follow trends of loudness, especially if I'm doing orchestral soundtracks. Like, I think in my orchestral a song that I have posted here in this channel, I didn't even use a compressor throughout. I try to handle everything with the volumes and automating volumes and that sort of stuff. I try to make it as dry, raw, and simple as possible. That might be something that I bring from influences of my favorite artists, like Tom Waits and Nick Cave, where they're very dry and they're very raw and simple. I like that. So I tend not to try to fix my song in there, and I try to keep it as, again, as simple as possible, especially in video games. Like, what I'm trying to do here is it's write music for video games, soundtrack for video games. They're going to be playing on with what needs to be really loud in the video games are the sound effects of the game, right? Not necessarily the music. That those bullets, the shots, the swords hitting the enemy, or the sword fights, and that sort of stuff, or the vehicles, but the music not necessarily. So I don't focus on making it loud. I don't try not to. I tend not to use a lot of compressors and limiters and that sort of stuff. I tend to just leave it in the mix, manage with volumes, EQing. And the 10th and last thing is, my music doesn't have to sound like something I've heard before. And this is tricky also, because one of the things that you do when you get an assignment, when you get, when you are going to write music for a video game or for anything, is you try to find references, right? You try to find inspiration in other soundtracks, music, whatever. When I was doing the horror track for Dead Space, I remember that I went to find inspiration, right? But one of the things that I tried to do was not to find inspiration in the Dead Space soundtrack. For me, one of the goals was, first, was to try to do something that I've never done before, which is a horror track. Second, I didn't want to sound like the existing soundtrack, right? So I wanted to sound differently. So I went for inspiration. I went on games that I felt had some sort of horror element, or were horror games, but weren't related to sci-fi or something similar to Dead Space, right? Try to analyze the tracks in a way. What makes this track horror like? Where's the tension? What makes it scary is the word that I'm looking for. So those kind of things is what I'm trying to find when I'm researching and looking for inspiration. Not necessarily to get inspired on the melody, or not necessarily to get inspired on the style or whatever. And I'm trying to kind of dissect what makes the track what it is, or what makes that track accomplish what it's trying to accomplish, whether it's suspense, sadness, happiness, horror, scariness, that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, those are the 10 things that I do that hopefully make my music feel unique, feel that comes from my mind and my style. So that's one of the hardest things, and you never stop. Like, I will never stop. I will never stop trying to find or evolve my voice, my style, the way I do things, especially, again, being a self-taught artist. I'm always discovering new things and new techniques. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for staying for this long. I hope you like it, and let's start the conversation in the comments below. What are things that you do that you find that are uniquely yours, that you find those are part of your process, that make your voice unique and make your music feel your music? Leave it in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, like the video if you liked it, don't like the video if you didn't like it. Of course, that always helps. Both of them actually help. And share this video with anyone who you think might be interesting in this type of content. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I see you in the next one. Peace.